Pakistan was weeks away from closing one of the biggest arms deals in its history. Then Saudi Arabia pulled the plug. $5.5 billion in defense revenue. Gone. And the story behind that decision reveals just how deeply the rivalries of the Gulf are now reshaping the security map of Africa. Welcome to World News Now, your daily briefing on the stories shaping our world. To understand what happened, you have to go back to the ambition. Pakistan spent 2025 building something remarkable. After a brief military confrontation with India in May of that year, Islamabad began aggressively marketing its defense hardware as battle-tested. Defense exports hit nearly $10 billion for the year, the highest in Pakistan's history. The crown jewel was the JF-17 Thunder, a multi-role fighter jet produced jointly with China, positioned as a cost-effective alternative to Western systems. On the back of that momentum, Pakistan signed two enormous African deals. In December 2025, it locked in a $4 billion agreement with Libya's eastern-based Libyan National Army, one of the largest arms contracts in its history. That package reportedly included 16 JF-17 fighters and 12 Super Mashak trainer aircraft. Then came Sudan, a $1.5 billion agreement with Sudan's armed forces, structured to include 10 Karakoram 8 light attack aircraft, over 200 drones, advanced air defense systems, and more. Both deals were reported to be Saudi-financed or Saudi-facilitated. Pakistan's target was $20 billion a year in defense exports by 2030. Africa was the opening. Now here's the part that really matters. Sudan is not just a country at war, it is the central battleground in a bitter rivalry between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Since April 2023, Sudan's national army has been fighting a brutal civil war against the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The UAE backs the RSF with drones and equipment. Saudi Arabia backs the national government in Khartoum. That conflict has already displaced millions and produced one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. For Saudi Arabia, a massive Pakistani arms package flowing into Khartoum seemed at first like a useful move, tipping the military balance against an Emirati-backed rival force. But something changed. A video circulated earlier this year featuring a Sudanese military officer reportedly linked to remnants of the former Bashir Karmat network. In it, the officer praised Iran, denounced Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and allegedly called on Tehran to target Gulf desalination infrastructure, some of the most critical facilities in the kingdom. That was the moment Saudi calculations shifted. Riyadh concluded that Sudan's armed forces were not operating as a unified political actor. Internal divisions within the military, between pragmatic commanders and harder-line factions, meant that weapons could end up empowering elements deeply hostile to Saudi interests. Financing a massive arms transfer into that environment was no longer a viable risk. In April 2026, Saudi Arabia withdrew its financing and reportedly urged Pakistan to cancel the deal entirely. At the same time, the broader diplomatic picture had also grown more complicated. Pakistan had signed a landmark strategic mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia in September 2025, a treaty-level commitment stating that an attack on one would be treated as an attack on both. Pakistan had even deployed military personnel to a Saudi airbase in April 2026, the first operational activation of that agreement. But Pakistan was also serving as a mediator in ceasefire negotiations involving Iran. Saudi Arabia, watching Islamabad navigate both relationships simultaneously, concluded that Pakistan could not serve as both a treaty ally and a credible arms pipeline into a war where Iran-linked officers had penetrated the other side. Saudi Arabia had a straightforward commercial lever. It financed the Sudan deal directly. Withdrawing the money was enough. No weapons, no deal. The financial damage is significant. Combined, the Sudan and Libya packages represent roughly $5.5 billion in potential defense export revenue, much of it now contingent on Saudi approval. Reports indicate the Libya deal is also under pressure, with Riyadh reassessing its African strategy across both theaters. For Pakistan, the episode exposes a structural vulnerability at the heart of its defense export ambitions. The country produces approximately 25 JF-17 frames per year, constrained by engine supply. Every contract depends not just on a willing buyer, but on a willing financier. And right now, Saudi Arabia effectively controls both roles, not as a buyer, but as the patron whose approval determines whether other buyers can be served at all. The diplomat put it plainly, Saudi Arabia's decision has delivered a reminder that Pakistan's geopolitical reach remains heavily dependent on external patrons. What this story ultimately shows is that arms deals in conflict zones are never just commercial transactions. They are bets on political stability, on the loyalty of military factions, and on the diplomatic relationships that hold everything together. When those relationships shift, as they did here, even billion-dollar agreements can collapse overnight.
If you want to stay ahead of the stories that are actually moving the world, subscribe to World News Now and hit the bell so you never miss a headline.